Guadalcanal, October 1942. Dawn comes without color. The air hangs thick with rot and gunpowder. A thin mist slides along the Lunga River where the trees have been ripped apart by weeks of shell fire. Somewhere out there, between the shattered palms and the hiss of insects, a Japanese sniper waits. He's already taken 3 men that morning. The platoon doesn't move now. They listen. Every rustle sounds like a trigger pull. In a shallow foxhole, a young Marine sergeant wipes rain from his helmet. It's dented where a bullet grazed it 2 days ago. He studies the far bank, then the helmet in his hand. Quietly, he pokes a stick through its liner and lifts it above the rim of the trench. Just high enough for sunlight to catch the curve of steel. A sharp crack answers. Clean. Perfect shot, straight through the helmet's crown. The dirt beside his boot explodes. He smiles. He's found his man. Half a breath later, 3 rifles roar back in chorus. Across the riverbank, a muzzle flash flickers once, then vanishes forever. One absurd idea in the mud just rewrote the balance between hunter and hunted. The Pacific War was, above all, a soldier's war fought without mercy. From the jungles of New Guinea to the coral flats of the Solomons, the island campaigns were a contest of endurance in which distance, heat, and disease often killed more efficiently than bullets. On these battlefields, the unseen enemy ruled. The sniper, the Japanese Imperial Army, elevated marksmanship to art form and ritual. Recruits spent months perfecting sitting shots at stationary targets before advancing to moving silhouettes, wind adjustments, and camouflage in thick cover. Sniper schools in Nagoya and Toyama taught patience as a weapon. Stay motionless, save ammunition, wait for movement that reveals fear. They learned to ghost through tropical canopies draped in burlap and vines, positions reinforced by bamboo coverings, or perched in coconut trees along trails. A single rifleman could delay companies for hours. Every battle diary from 1942 reads the same refrain: couldn't locate him. When U.S. Marines landed on Guadalcanal in August 1942, they faced an environment designed to amplify that terror. No broad fields like Europe, only ceiling-high vegetation and rivers glinting with light. For troops raised on open-range shooting, it was a nightmare. Sniper bullets often came without sound, only a puff in a tree trunk or the wet collapse of someone's body. By night, the same rifles hunted sentries by muzzle flashes or the faint gleam of metal on a helmet brim. Japanese snipers targeted heads deliberately. Helmets, at first, were more liability than protection. The Allied response was conventional: artillery sweeps, mortar fire, flamethrowers to clear suspected nests. Yet most solutions arrived hours late, after casualties piled. It was the kind of problem no manual could solve because the contest wasn't about firepower, it was about nerves. The United States had entered the war with confidence in machines, not instincts. Island warfare began altering that belief one bullet at a time. Behind every patrol that stumbled into a clearing, there came the awareness of eyes watching from silence. A glint of sun on water might be a reflection or the curve of a scope. Veterans learned new rituals: smear mud on everything metal, crawl instead of walk, talk only by gesture. But superstition wasn't always enough. By October, the 1st Marine Division counted hundreds of men wounded or killed by a single round from distances barely measurable through foliage. Commanders ordered study groups to catalog sniper patterns, range estimates, and stemming points. They found that each Japanese marksman carried unique habits. Some favored headshots through helmets. Others timed fire to coincidence with artillery bursts. Predicting them required imagination, not rank. That imagination often came from the lowest ranks, the infantrymen whose survival depended on noticing the smallest patterns. They began improvising. Some tied ration tins to branches and rattled them to draw fire while spotters flanked the sound. Others used mirrors, swivel bayonets, even reflections from canteens to trick a sniper into revealing himself. The tactic that spread fastest, however, came from a single incident, an almost childish experiment that decided to test the predator's reflex. Nobody knows the man's name for certain. Marine records list several similar encounters between late September and early October 1942. But somewhere along the Tenerife River, or perhaps further west near Henderson Field, a soldier lifted his steel M1 helmet on a stick to see if the sniper would take the bait. He did. When the shot cracked harmlessly through the helmet, the platoon triangulated the muzzle flash and silenced the assassin. What began as a momentary trickle of defiance turned into practice. Soon every foxhole carried its decoy gear, spare helmets, sticks, broken branches shaped into human silhouettes. Guadalcanal marked the beginning of America learning to fight invisible war through wit as much as fire. The helmet trick was part of a larger culture shift underway in 1942, the move from textbook warfare to field adaptation. The lesson was universal. When facing an enemy who lived by patience, victory belonged to whoever could invent faster. An invention, as the islands proved, was rarely glamorous. It was born in mud, fear, and mockery of death itself. When the first U.S. Army units began rotating through Guadalcanal after the Marines, they inherited an education paid for in blood. Many soldiers arrived fresh from stateside training fields, Georgia pine forests, Kansas plains, still thinking of warfare in textbook geometry. They had practiced open-sight drills, but not how to breathe under constant, unseen threat. The veterans shook their heads. "You won't see him," they warned, "but he sees everything you do." The Japanese sniper's greatest ally was terrain. Rain turned foxholes into rice paddies, where sweat and mosquitoes replaced sleep. He used high trees as fortresses, dug spider holes camouflaged with leaves, and operated in pairs. One shooter, one observer ready to shift position. To draw fire, he would pin an American helmet to a stick and wave it, mimicking Allied curiosity. The bitter irony wasn't lost on the men crouched below. The trick they would later perfect had first been used against them. Early U.S. intelligence reports misread these dangers as discipline failures. Commanders chalked casualties up to jungle anxiety until field officers began documenting clear patterns. Skulls struck through helmet vents. Empty canteens punctured lone bullet holes. Watches shattered on wrists above foxholes. Japanese sharpshooters were firing single rounds at measured intervals, sometimes waiting 15 minutes between shots. Their goal wasn't simply to kill. It was to paralyze movement. One hidden rifle could immobilize 40 men. Conventional tactics, call in mortars, searchline sweeps, only made things worse. Snipers fired, then disappeared. The Americans needed ways to make the invisible expose itself. That necessity sparked the small innovations that defined later island campaigns. Empty helmets raised on sticks, helmets mounted on sandbags, even rubber trees with canteen mirrors serving as bait. An informal laboratory of survival emerged along every front line. It was an age defined less by generals than by improvisers. On islands like New Georgia and Bougainville, GIs crafted wooden dummies in spare hours, testing reflections under midday sun. They discovered the Japanese riflemen often fired at the hint of a clean helmet curve glinting through fern light. So men began to scorch or dent their M1s deliberately, rubbing them with mud to dull sheen. Camouflage by imperfection. Helmets evolved from simple protection into psychological tools. A properly used piece of steel could command the enemy's reflex. It could turn caution into mistake. Asterisk in those same months, elsewhere across the Pacific, the Army and Marine Corps were learning parallel lessons about adaptation. Flamethrowers were still experimental. Smoke shells unreliable in wet jungle air. But deception, that required only nerve and imagination. Field notes survived describing how entire squads used staged helmets placed along ridgelines to create illusion of greater force before an assault. Under moonlight, faint shapes fooled not only enemy eyes, but their morale. A sniper who wasted rounds on emptiness lost his advantage. Ammunition for Imperial troops on isolated islands was finite and irreplaceable. Every false shot a helmet drew was a small victory counted in hours of breathing freely. WWII 1943. Such small victories were becoming philosophy. Manuals urged soldiers to use deception freely in confined terrain. Photography from New Guinea shows lines of helmets perched on bamboo stalks, some painted, others riddled with bullet holes, guarding perimeters while the real soldiers crawled elsewhere. In divisional briefings, experienced non-commissioned officers introduced these tricks as standard lore alongside bayonet use and field rations. The crazy helmet trick, as privates called it, grew beyond anecdote into adaptation culture. Every improvement radiated outward. Homemade periscope mirrors for trench scanning, listening ropes that signaled tree sniper movement, improvised decoys crafted from coconuts wrapped in fatigues. The American infantryman was learning to fight with intellect as main weapon, reshaping tactics from the ground upward, literally, when the battlefronts shifted northward toward Tarawa and Bougainville. The doctrine of resourceful deception traveled with them. Even before official acknowledgement, field rumor turned it into morale symbol. Make him waste a bullet. Make him move. Cleverness had become contagious. Soon, the helmet trick was no longer a Pacific curiosity. It was U.S. Army standard folklore. A field-born wisdom proving that sometimes survival depended not on superior weaponry, but on the creativity. Hiding beneath the same battered steel shell that caught the sun and dared the enemy to shoot, for the men pinned beneath trees on islands like Guadalcanal and New Guinea. A sniper's bullet was not just a weapon, it was a presence. It changed how you breathed, slept, and even how you blinked. Every moment in a foxhole felt borrowed from luck. Rifle fire came without warning, punctuating endless hours of stillness. Men whispered so softly it sounded like prayer. Flies hovered around unburied hands in the mud, but no one dared swat them for fear of movement. The jungle itself turned traitor. The sun's reflection on dewy leaves mimicked lens flare from a scope. It was in that suffocating patience that cunning began to matter more than bravery. A simple motion of metal on wood could mean the difference between silence and death. The helmet trick emerged not from training but exhaustion. A soldier too weary to wait for fate deciding to disobey fear. Because when you live under a rifle that never misses, inventiveness is the last form of rebellion. Field manuals soon recognized that deceit could serve as armor. Reports from Guadalcanal record Marines using decoy helmets to force hidden marksmen to reveal their positions before counterfire. Procedure was simple. One man raised a helmet using a stick or bayonet, while two others watched through rifle sights scanning likely angles. The instant a shot cracked, all guns converged. Sometimes no sniper answered because he'd learned the trick, but that was victory too. Hesitation meant safety long enough to move. In certain sectors, helmets were arranged at night, on termite mounds or bamboo poles to simulate sentry posts. Mist over riverbanks carried faint silhouettes that tricked even veteran enemy observers. Psychological balance swung mile by mile. Adding insult to injury, soldiers began personalizing decoys, drawing faces, carving initials, tokens turning survival into humor. What had started as a single act of inspiration evolved into a system, the Phantom Platoon, an army of disembodied helmets holding the line while real men crept elsewhere unseen. The American M1 helmet accidentally invited innovation. Unlike earlier flat-top designs, it had a pronounced curve that caught light like a mirror and could take a rifle round at glancing angle. That dome made it perfect bait, distinct, familiar, and visible through foliage. It also echoed in Japanese sights as unmistakably American. Troops joked that Washington had shipped them built-in decoys. With chin straps unfastened, the helmet wobbled naturally on its mount, creating the illusion of a curious head. Even its olive-drab surface could mimic skin tone under certain light conditions when dulled by mud. A lump of steel became the cheapest counterintelligence device of the war. Quartermasters recorded odd supply losses not from damage but creative reassignment. Helmets requisitioned twice over because one sat on a soldier's head while another stood service atop a stick. The M1 became, unintentionally, proof that sometimes the deadliest battlefield equipment isn't the newest, it's the most adaptable. Imperial Japanese snipers prided themselves on discipline and economy. One shot, one kill. Trained through philosophies blending marksmanship with bushido, they considered waste of ammunition dishonor. Many were craftsmen of patience, able to stay unmoving for 2 days, urinating into cloth bags, living on rice pellets. When decoys appeared, they confronted a dilemma of creed. Snipers lived on confidence that the first visible target meant sure kill. But when helmets rose in false profusion across ridges, that confidence eroded. Reports translated from captured diaries reveal confusion. Objects appear. No enemy found. A bad omen. Each missed shot carried shame and punishment from officers convinced morale weakness invited failure. By late 1943, Japanese units reduced sniper fire to conserve ammunition, not realizing they'd already surrendered the initiative to illusion. The Americans had weaponized deception while their opponents were bound by doctrine. The hunter became hesitant. Hesitation in warfare, like exposure, is fatal, from flesh to fabrication, from fear to calculation. Deception had turned from survival instinct into cultural counterstrategy, proof that even in the Pacific's most primitive battlefields, intelligence electricity hummed beneath the noise of rifles. The success of the helmet decoy revealed a quiet revolution within military thinking. In most armies, ideas drift downward from headquarters. On the islands, they floated up from the mud. Platoon leaders, often no older than 23, began to rely less on printed orders and more on the creativity of their men. Reports about the helmet ruse reached regimental command through informal channels, handwritten notes, radio chatter, even hearsay carried by mess sergeants. Instead of reprimanding those involved for unauthorized tactics, commanders quietly encouraged replication. Majors in New Guinea briefings started asking, "Anything new working down there?" That simple question opened a door. Trust, filtering upward, transformed veterans into teachers. They could contribute to the doctrine shaping their own fate. It was this humility, accepting that innovation could come from ordinary soldiers, that allowed the U.S. forces to evolve faster than their opponents. The helmet trick became shorthand for the freedom to improvise, turning chain of command from hierarchy into dialogue. There's a moral paradox in war's cleverness. Deceit aimed to save lives feels different from deceit aimed to take them. For those who raised helmets on bamboo sticks, the trick wasn't cruelty, it was reprieve. Every false shot meant a friend survived another hour. Every fooled marksman wasted scarce ammunition meant one less real bullet in the air. Survivors later described it not as tricking the enemy, but making him show himself so we could stop losing boys. Their conscience framed the deception as self-defense elevated to art. And yet, each success still ended with the same recoil. The same human cost. Another man dead because someone dared to think faster. Field chaplains recorded moral fatigue creeping into diaries, the realization that even intelligence could stain the soul. But within that fatigue lay a strange pride. If they had to choose between cruelty and stupidity, cleverness felt the lesser sin. War reduced ethics to arithmetic, and the helmet became the smallest possible calculation for survival, that a sniper's bullet controlled space through terror. By inventing counters, soldiers reclaimed the initiative and their sanity. Each successful decoy restored a fragment of confidence. Reports from medical officers on Guadalcanal noted a visible drop in battle tremors once units adopted active measures. Decoy tactics offered soldiers something to do with fear, converting paralysis into participation. Instead of hiding beneath earth, they manipulated the threat. It stopped being luck, one Marine wrote. It became a game, and we liked our odds better. The helmet, ironically a symbol of passive defense, turned into psychological offense. The trick also united scattered men through shared humor. Photos taken after campaigns show lines of helmets riddled with holes arranged like trophies. They served as proof that intellect could laugh at death, even momentarily, which for exhausted soldiers meant victory beyond statistics. Like most field inventions, the origins blurred with retelling. Some veterans swore it began on Guadalcanal. Others claimed New Guinea or Tarawa. Unit newsletters turned the nameless sergeant into a folk hero, the man who taught a sniper patience. Newspapers back home simplified the story into headline comfort. Yank ingenuity beats Jap trickery. The nuance faded, but the message stuck. American improvisation had outthought the Empire's discipline. Recruiting posters echoed the theme, praising adaptability over conformity. Post-war films exaggerated the episode into slapstick triumphs, helmets bouncing on sticks like puppets. Reality had been darker, quieter, but no less brilliant. For the veterans themselves, the tale represented something deeper. It validated the ordinary man's instinct amid chaos, a single gesture showing that the human mind, even under terror, still possessed choice. In Army tradition, technology often stole credit. Here, wit did. And that irony kept the story alive long after rifles fell silent. WWII late 1943. The decoy helmet was part of lore, proof that the greatest weapons in the Pacific could be improvised from nothing more than nerve, timing, and faith that intelligence survives even at ground level. Asterisk. Guadalcanal, October 1942 to Tenerife River snaked like smoke through shredded undergrowth. The dawn patrol of the 1st Marine Regiment had left the perimeter before sunrise, moving single file along the bank. They were half ghosts already, helmets caked in red mud, uniforms stiff with sweat and rain. An hour out, the jungle broke into a clearing scattered with tree stumps blackened by artillery. That was when the first shot came. Private Paul Hankins dropped instantly, a hole above his right ear. No sound, no muzzle flash. The squad froze. Every bush looked guilty. Corporal Jack Fields knew the pattern. One shot, silence, then maybe another in 10 minutes. They crouched behind logs as insects screamed around them. The corporal sensed the sniper was east across the waterline, straight into the rising sun. Any movement toward that slope meant suicide. The lieutenant whispered for mortar support, but radios here were as temperamental as weather. They had no coordinates, no communication, nothing except instinct and a single steel helmet resting on fields of mud. Fields studied the curved dome beside him. The sun flashing off its battered paint betrayed everything, its temptation. He slid it off, tamped a bamboo stick into the dirt, and mounted the helmet at human height near a pig-rooted stump. He nodded to his men. They waited. Long minutes passed. Then, the crack of a 6.5mm Type 38 round. The helmet spun like a coin, pierced cleanly through the top. Dirt spat around it. Before the echo died, every Marine who'd watched that flash opened fire. 3 Garans, 1 bar, each aimed not where the bullet came from, but where the light had flared. Among the withering leaves of a banyan tree 90 yards across the bank, a figure slumped forward, rifle dangling by sling. Silence returned, deep as water. They crossed after securing their perimeter. The sniper lay wedged in a fork of branches, camouflaged under a broken hemp net. Fields examined the rifle, a Japanese Arisaka, its barrel wrapped with rags to hide reflection. The shooter had balanced on a rope ladder anchored to roots, a nest built for killing art. Without that artificial head on a stick, he might have continued for days, 1 bullet per breath. The Marines didn't celebrate. There was no cheer beyond relief, no talk of medals. They took the man's rifle, dropped it into the river, and covered the corpse with fallen leaves. Someone joked it was a waste of a good helmet, and laughter stuttered through the ranks until exhaustion reclaimed silence. By noon they had advanced another 100 yards, but the incident traveled faster than footsteps. Back at the command post by Lunga, word spread of Fields' trick. Officers half mocked, half admired it. Hell of a way to spend government property. But the anecdote stuck because it worked. By evening, 2 platoons had tried the same tactic, one along the Matanica River and another near Mount Austin. 4 additional snipers died that week, each betrayed by reflex, each drawn by the glint of a decoy dome. What happened at Tenerife moved from rumor to printed field note. The Marine Division's after-action summary recorded dryly. Enemy sniper neutralized by means of false helmet exposure. Method successful. Repeat trial recommended. It was bureaucratic understatement for innovation born in desperation. Among the men, though, it meant something simpler. Proof that they could strike back against the invisible. For weeks they'd been hunted by eyes they couldn't see. Shots from nowhere. Comrades falling from nothing. Now they had a counterspell. A metal bowl on a bamboo stick didn't just save lives. It restored balance. Finally, there was a way to challenge the unseen without artillery, without waiting for luck. That night, Corporal Field sat cleaning his rifle under flickering lanterns made from ration tins. He placed the bullet-punctured helmet beside him like a trophy. He didn't know it yet, but his improvised gesture would echo across the Pacific. Within months, helmet decoys would appear in training camps from Hawaii to Australia. Their origins credited only as field ingenuity. Before dawn broke, one of his squad mates stenciled on the dented shell in chalk. "Heads up, Japs." It wasn't bravado, it was catharsis. They'd beaten terror using nothing more than wit and steel, and that new confidence was contagious. It would soon change how entire divisions fought the unseen war in the trees. Within a week of the Tenerife episode, word of the helmet trick had moved faster than any official report. Across the humid network of foxholes and company bivouacs, Marines told the story like gospel. A man raised a helmet. The sniper fell for it. The squad lived. The frontline rumor expanded with every retelling. Some claimed the decoy drew 3 shots. Others said the same helmet was used by 4 units up and down the Lunga perimeter. Fact bled into myth, but it did not matter. The idea was impossible to kill because it worked. Field observers from the 1st Marine Division's intelligence section began cataloging improvisations of every kind. Dummy heads carved from coconuts. Bayonets stuck upright in the sand carrying torn shirts. Helmets balanced to bob with the wind. Each trick shared a single principle: force the unseen shooter to act first. The notebook labeled Improvised Counter-Sniper Measures, 1942 still sits in the Marine Corps archives. On its 3rd page, a sketch of a helmet atop a bamboo stake sits beside the note. Used sparingly to preserve effect. By mid-November, the ingenuity formally crossed into Army usage. When the 164th Infantry Regiment relieved Marines near Henderson Field, they were briefed by a sergeant who mentioned our helmet scouts. His explanation was met with nervous laughter, but no one argued. Every soldier knew the chill that came with a bullet snapping overhead. If imitation offered even a few seconds of advantage, it was worth ridicule. The Japanese noticed too. Captured diaries recovered from the western shore of the island included remarks about enemy heads that appear suddenly and vanish. One sniper, writing days before he was killed, complained that the Americans used magic, the trick heads that drew fire away from the real ones. His choice of the word magic meant the deception had penetrated beyond tactics into morale. An opponent who believed you controlled illusion stopped trusting his own senses. That was victory in miniature. Commanders took quiet note of results. Colonel William Sellers, then Division Operations Officer, later described how Marines integrated decoy shots with mortar fire. A helmet rise would bait the sniper. Once the crack echoed, pre-sighted mortars blanketed the zone. It was science reshaped by timing, not theory. Suddenly the battlefield held parity, eyes against eyes, wit against wit. The minor trick's success reached the ears of Australian forces cooperating with Marines in the Solomons. By early 1943, they were adapting the idea, using battered British Mk2 helmets filled with mud for weight. From Papua to Milne Bay, the exchange of ideas continued without formality, proof that creativity obeyed no flag at higher levels. The helmet decoy remained unofficial. War departments preferred tales of courage over cleverness. Equipment was easier to glorify than improvisation, but officers in the field quietly encouraged it. A February 1943 division memo titled Experiences in Sniper Warfare listed 13 observations. Number 5 read simply, easiest decoy, helmet. Most effective. Average life expectancy after exposure, 1 shot. That lone 1 shot was the difference between life and death for hundreds of men. Photographs from this period show the tactics spreading alongside humor. At rest camps near Tulagi, Marines arranged pierced helmets in neat rows, labeling them with chalk remarks. Jap target practice or free ammunition here. What had begun as a desperate act now served morale. Laughter was as essential as ammunition in jungles where disease outnumbered gunfire. Each new hole in a helmet felt like proof the gods of chance could be fooled at least once. The ripple effect reached even the manual writers. When the U.S. Army issued Field Manual 3120, Jungle Warfare in 1944, scattered phrases quietly echoed the idea. Encouragement of dummy heads or rifle barrel displays to locate hidden shooters. No credit, no story, just words petrified into doctrine. Every trick that began under a banyan tree now lived inside official print. The Japanese response was measured but telling. Facing dwindling supplies, they shifted sniper assignments to counter sniping, ordering men to conserve rounds until they confirmed movement of shoulders or hands. It slowed their tempo, dulled their terror. Veterans later admitted they spent long stretches staring at helmets, second-guessing themselves while American patrols advanced under cover of deception. Decoys didn't just save lives, they regained momentum. On islands where every yard of mud cost blood, hesitation became liberation. The act born of one man's weary defiance had changed the conversation of battle. It proved that courage did not always require rushing forward. Sometimes, it meant standing still enough to outthink a bullet. From then on, every rising dome of steel on a stick was more than bait. It was rebellion against fatalism. And by the time the campaign shifted to New Georgia, what began as a crazy idea had turned into policy cloaked in rumor. A single helmet in the mud had become the pivot point of an invisible duel, a moment where intellect overtook fear, and soldiers' wit reshaped the very texture of the Pacific War. By the spring of 1943, Guadalcanal was silent except for the sea's breath around wrecked ships. For the men who had survived it, silence felt louder than battle. They carried home more than malaria and nightmares. They carried experience that could be translated. Every platoon arriving on new beaches inherited the unwritten rules carved out in jungle mud. At the top of that list was a sentence never printed in any manual but passed whisper to whisper. Let the helmet take the first shot. From the Solomons, those rules traveled with the changing tides of war. On New Georgia, photographs show helmets propped atop, termitary mounds with faint stick shadows below them, decoys so convincing that Japanese prisoners reportedly described firing on phantom heads. At Bougainville and Leyte, soldiers used bamboo poles pivoted through bipod joints so decoys could be raised or lowered remotely. Cleverness evolved into engineering. Each new island turned improvisers into instructors. Training films shot at Milne Bay and Noumea in 1944 quietly demonstrated field counter-sniper tactics, using sticks and helmets, officially unnamed, but unmistakable in lineage. The results showed in data. Marine medical records from late 1943 onward noted a steady drop in single-bullet head wounds, once common on Guadalcanal, thanks largely to improved cover and deceptive exposure. The helmet trick murmured through statistical silence. Lives saved, but never counted. Commanders realized deception was more than self-defense. It was strategy. What began as resistance to paralysis became active psychological warfare. Every false target forced the enemy to waste ammunition, reveal location, or experience uncertainty. And uncertainty corrodes discipline faster than bullets. The Japanese manual instructions for sniper activity in jungle terrain revised in 1944 acknowledged persistent enemy artifices using helmets and dummy figures. The line read like reluctant admiration: AET evening mess tents on places like Cape Gloucester. Marines swapped stories while turning empty. Beer cans into mock binoculars or carving souvenir. Bamboo sticks labeled sniper bait. What had once been desperation turned into humor and emotional armor that kept sanity intact. A helmet balanced on a branch became the campaign's unofficial mascot. Wit over weapon, nerve over noise. Logistical officers documented makeshift ingenuity with equal fascination. One after-action report collected 15 distinct helmet misuse cases, ranging from flotation devices during river crossings to makeshift stoves. The writer added wryly, possibly the most versatile quartermaster issue since ammunition. But beneath the gallows humor lay truth. The American infantryman's greatest asset was freedom to improvise. This flexibility, encouraged in small things, would pay exponential dividends as assaults in 1944 grew mechanized and complex. From line grunt to general staff, the lesson was absorbed. Men who think for themselves survive longer and fight smarter. Japan's Sniper Corps, meanwhile, declined sharply. Captured correspondence between tactical instructors revealed dissatisfaction with fresh replacements. Undertrained, under-equipped, living off the myth of invincibility their predecessors had crafted. When confronted by deception, they hesitated, broke camouflage, or fired prematurely. Entire shot sequences faltered under self-doubt. In war's arithmetic, hesitation is defeat disguised as prudence. The strange equilibrium born at Tenarue had flipped. Now it was the Japanese who second-guessed the terrain, seeing ghosts where helmets gleamed. Intelligence officers labeled this shift psychological inversion, the point at which predator anxiety equals prey awareness. That inversion reached every engagement thereafter. By 1945, the Pacific battlefields bristled less with unseen bullets and more with the knowledge that even hunters could be hunted by illusion. The crazy helmet trick did not win the war, but it represented something larger, an evolution in thinking. Victory did not come from armor-plated technology alone. It came from minds that refused to obey fear. Each dented helmet on a stick, each deliberate act of defiance against the unseen scope, was a line on a blueprint of survival, a kind no engineer could draw. And as the campaign pushed into the Philippine archipelago, that blueprint guided soldiers who'd never heard of Guadalcanal to trust intelligence over instinct and cunning over chaos. The Pacific War's final chapters were measured not only in territory, but in adaptation. By the time American forces landed at Leyte and Luzon, the once terrifying sound of a single, distant rifle shot no longer froze entire units. They had learned its pattern, its psychology, its countermeasure. The fear that had stalked Guadalcanal had been reduced to procedure, one more hazard of combat rather than a haunting unknown. Across the new fronts, deception was now institutional. Training camps in Hawaii and Australia taught fresh replacements, field resourcefulness, dummy silhouettes, helmet decoys, reflective contraptions made from canteens. Officers referenced them in lectures on morale, proof that intelligence could be as lethal as ammunition. Instructors affectionately called it Yank improvisation. During jungle drills, helmets with bullet holes were passed around like talismans, tangible evidence that ingenuity could master terror. Each newcomer handled that steel impression of survival as if it contained both warning and invitation. Think for yourself, or die by routine. Post-war documentaries later painted the Pacific soldier as muscle and bravery. But contemporary reports reveal something humbler: an army of tinkerers. They made radio parts from spare batteries, reinforced foxholes with airplane scrap, and designed life-saving ruses using the simplest materials at hand. In that spirit, the decoy helmet became shorthand for a mindset, a refusal to surrender intellect to fear. It was this culture that allowed the American military machine, sprawling and diverse, to turn scattered improvisations into cohesive doctrine by 1945. For the Japanese side, sniper warfare wilted beneath shortages and moral fatigue. Ammunition scarcity magnified the deception's success. Each wasted round was irreplaceable. Reports from defenders on Iwo Jima and Okinawa complained of enemy practice of feigns using false helmets and movements. They knew they were being tricked, yet knowledge didn't equal control. Their perfectionist training forbade random shots. Hesitation rendered them ineffective. The American infantrymen had forced order to fight chaos, and chaos always wins that contest. When peace arrived in August 1945, most veterans returned home with tropical scars and keepsakes: a coin cut from Japanese aluminum, a bayonet, sometimes a helmet with ghostly holes punched clean through it. It was no longer merely protection. It was an artifact of thinking under fire. At reunions years later, jokes about the helmet decoy resurfaced as comedy masking awe. Those who'd used it spoke with mixed pride and remorse. They had tricked men devoted to duty so absolute that dying for it felt inevitable. Outsmarting such devotion left a complicated silence few could describe. Military historians later recognized the episode as one tile in the mosaic of small unit innovation that defined the Pacific theater. Beyond massive carrier fleets and atomic breakthroughs, the war's truth was human scale, fleeting acts of wit against systemic brutality. The crazy helmet trick possessed no grand inventor to ornament it. It belonged to every anonymous private who refused to die by predictability. That collective authorship is what made it indestructible. Innovation spread without need for signature. In post-war training doctrine, deception was reborn under formal language. Field Manual 7-8 would later emphasize improvised observation devices and dummy positions as standard practice. Few instructors knew the origin. None realized that the dry sentences aped the rhythm of a story whispered first among rain-soaked foxholes years earlier. History's official tone rarely admits wit. The battlefield always does. By the 1950s, the original helmets were rusting in Pacific soil, their stick handles consumed by termites and vines. But their influence surfaced in every counter-sniper tactic studied by subsequent generations. When American troops fought again in jungles decades later, they used periscopic mirrors, fiber dummies, and movement lures, descendants of a nameless Marines rebellion. The lineage traced itself through intuition rather than citation. Some legends feed themselves on exaggeration. This one survived because it was ordinary. A single helmet raised into light against a fatal aim embodied the oldest lesson in war: that the mind moves faster than the bullet that seeks to stop it. And as veterans used to say, half laughing, half proud, the best armor we ever had was an idea. War often worships strength, but it is sustained by imagination. For every grand strategy plotted in marble halls, there is a small, desperate invention made in silence by someone who refuses to be predictable. The helmet trick on Guadalcanal was nothing romantic, just a grunt's impulse to fight fear with thought. Yet in that handful of seconds, he proved that intellect could wound terror more effectively than any rifle. The Pacific campaigns left images the world still cannot forget. Palm trees burning, bodies in tidal shallows, soldiers hollowed by exhaustion. But hidden beneath those vast tragedies ran moments of clarity, a human resourcefulness that refused to die. A dented piece of steel lifted on a stick became a metaphor for something unmeasurable, a mind still working under unbearable noise. It became proof that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to think anyway. In retrospect, the invention's beauty lies in its humility. It required neither wealth nor orders, only permission granted by desperation. The soldier who raised that helmet had no audience, no certainty of success. He simply outreasoned death for one heartbeat and left behind a lesson written in mud and ripples. Knowledge doesn't only defend, it liberates. Generations of soldiers after him would inherit the same paradox, that the most professional warrior may also be the sharpest improviser. From dummy heads on battlefields to electronic decoys in skies, the form changed, the idea remained constant. When the enemy owns the gun, own his expectation. At museums today, America's M1 helmet sits under glass, smooth, empty, ordinary. No inscription tells visitors that its curve once mirrored the mind that wielded it. Yet if you look closely at its battered rim, you can still imagine the moment it rose into sunlight, an invitation no sniper could resist. And the instant a single act of wit turned fear itself into misfire. War creates monsters, but it also reveals inventors. Every time intelligence triumphs over panic, it affirms the quiet truth hidden in that jungle dawn. Sometimes, survival isn't about armor at all. It's about the courage to think. If you like the video, hit like, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more real WWII stories every day. Thanks for watching.